Hey everybody being my wife and whoever watches this later. So we are gonna this is the first tool of practical systems for life and stewardship. So this I'm gonna go ahead and share the screen. Actually, before I do that, just wanted to say so this call, the purpose of it will just be to give literally what it sounds like, just tools to use in everyday life, things that I personally have found helpful, like in my faith or in my, just ways to kind of like have systems to live life by, basically. So this first one today, let me see if this will let me share my screen. This is the first time I've done this. Okay, boom. Can you see that? Okay. Now let's see if it'll let, if I can take this straight into presentation mode. All right, here we go. All right, is that coming through all right, babe? Okay. So this first one is called a habit contract. Purpose of it here is to just help us break sinful patterns and bad habits in our lives. Pretty straightforward. So put the verse in here to make sure this sounds Christian enough. But in all seriousness, this is I want to read this verse. Matthew 18:8 through 9. This is the CSB. If your hand or your foot causes you to fall away, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or lame than to have two hands or feet and be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to fall away, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with one eye than to have two eyes and be thrown into hellfire. So my purpose in including this, I think there's a lot of different stuff in this verse that could be debated about theologically and could bring about, certain questions of how it relates to other scriptures and stuff like that. It's not my purpose today to like go into any of that stuff, and I'm happy anybody who sees this later, I'm happy to talk about that stuff if anybody wants to. But the main purpose I wanted to get out of putting it in here was just to just kind of show the seriousness of sin and how important it is that we find ways to deal with it, and just try to like eradicate it from our lives. Like that's kind of the goal of me putting this verse in here. So it's kind of like the why of why we're looking at this habit contract thing in the first place. Now, I want to point out too, this thing is it helps deal with like sinful habits or just any bad habits. So here's what it is. And this is, I got this idea from the book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. If anybody hasn't read this, I definitely recommend it. It's one of the, I think, for me personally, one of the most important books I've read, uh, that just kind of help teach about like kind of like how the brain works, how habits are formed, how habits are broken, all that kind of stuff. And it's just very practical. So this is a quote from that book. It says, a habit contract is a verbal or written agreement in which you state your commitment to a particular habit and the punishment that will occur if you don't follow through. Then you find one or two people to act as your accountability partners and sign off on the contract with you. Um, this to me was a huge breakthrough when I read it because I've tried like the whole like what we normally think of as accountability partners in the past. Like I haven't, I have like here's the thing that I struggle with. So I'm going to tell somebody who I love and trust who's a Christian about it, and I'm going to ask them to hold me accountable for it. Um, and what I've run into in the past and why I don't think that model is great, even though it's kind of what I hear all the time, and what I was sort of taught to do is two reasons. Number one, people don't follow up. That's been my main experience is people just like you'll ask somebody and they'll say it, or even they might even offer to be your accountability partner, but then life's busy and they just forget to follow up with you. And the other part of it is for me, even the times I have asked somebody and they have followed up, I just like tend to not care enough about what people think, I guess, for it to be a strong enough consequence for me. That's something that I've run into. um, but what this does, and why it was a breakthrough for me, was that strategy that I just talked about. I think it makes the person the consequence. Like your accountability partner is the consequence for the action. And like I said, for me, and I'd imagine for a lot of people, that's not really a strong enough consequence, especially if it's somebody who you know is like merciful and loving and forgiving, and they're just gonna, and even if they're not, what exactly are they gonna do to you, you know? And so what this does is it's the consequence is what you create, and then the person who's your accountability partner is really just there to, you know, hold you accountable for holding yourself to the consequence. And so that person, I might not care that much about what people think of me, but there are certain things I do care about, and I want to be known as somebody who like does what I say I'm going to do. And so if I share this habit contract with somebody, and then they do check in with me, which has happened since I started this, I want to be able to say like either I haven't had to do the consequences, or yes, I did this, but then I followed the consequence. So this was just the way I worded it here, just because I feel like this kind of made it a little bit more clear. How does it work? A habit contract works by making the pain of the consequence more powerful than the benefit of the action. And so what I mean by that is we if we're doing something, we're obviously getting some benefit of it from it, right? It might be something sinful, that we are getting from it, or it might just be, it could be anything. It could be something from a sinful action to, just kind of like a habit of falling into mindlessly scrolling social media, or whatever bad habit you're trying to break, eating habits, whatever. It kind of like you're getting something from that action, or you wouldn't be doing it. And so what you have to do is whatever the consequence of is that pain, that you receive from the consequence has to kind of like outweigh the benefit that you're getting from the action. So this next one here, this is a quote from John Piper that I read a long time ago. And this quote stuck with me, but I didn't really know how to apply it until I learned about the habit contract. This was him talking about sexual sin. This is a quote he said, if the stakes are high enough and sure enough, you'll have all the self control you need to conquer any sexual temptation. And you can make that any sort of temptation or any bad habit, in my opinion. He says, for example, tonight, if you're feeling totally in this way of sexual desire, more blazing, more powerful than you have ever felt it in your life, and you believe you cannot resist the temptation to look at some nudity online, and suddenly a black hooded ISIS member drags your best friend or your spouse into the room with a knife at his or her throat and says, if you look at that website, I will slit this throat, you will have self control. You're not addicted. You won't click. Or if a man walks into the room and says, if you look at that nudity, I will not give you the $1 million that I have in this bag tax free. But if you do not look at it, I will give you a satchel with $1 million in cash. You will have total self control. And so I read that quote probably several years ago, and it really stuck with me, and I even tried to set consequences for myself. But this was before I had learned about this habit contract idea. And it just, what I ran into is I would set a consequence, but if there was no accountability, and it was just like, I could just change the consequence. I could just be like, that wasn't something that I should have done. I could justify it, and I could be like, that was too extreme of a consequence or whatever it was. And I could easily get away with it. When I learned about the habit contract, I feel like it was God kind of like connecting the dots. Even though the author James Clear, I have no idea his spiritual status. Is not a Christian book. It's just just a basically a self help book, I guess is what category it'd be under. But I think it was just great. But God, I feel like he just kind of these three quotes that I've put on here are sort of like the the stepping stones for me. It was like that scripture from Matthew 18, and then this quote from Piper, and then when I'm somebody who needs the practical. I need to understand, like, okay, I understand I shouldn't do these things. I understand that, like, okay, if I set the consequences high enough, but then I needed a tool, and this habit contract really stepped in and became that tool for me. So this right here is from that website, and it's a longer document. And anybody who sees this later, I will, if anybody sees it, just feel free to message me, whatever, and I will send you the link to this if you want to go through it. But I'm just going to read the first part, and then I'm going to give you just a few examples from this. It says, This is where I copied and pasted that from earlier. It says a habit contract is a verbal or written agreement in which you state your commitment to a particular habit and the punishment that will occur if you don't follow through. Then you find one or two people to act as your accountability partners and sign off on the contract with you. Brian Harris, an entrepreneur from Nashville, Tennessee, was the first person I saw put the strategy into action. Shortly after the birth of his son, Harris realized he wanted to shed a few pounds. He wrote a habit contract between himself, his wife, and his personal trainer. The strategy worked with his wife and trainer acting as accountability partners, and with the habit contract clarifying exactly what to do each day, Harris lost the weight. And then talks about how at the end of the PDF, it has a sample that you can kind of print out and create your own. So I just want to come down here and show this part. So these were his objectives. Write down all food that he consumes each day and weigh himself each day. The food log must be completed by 6 a.m. of the day after. The weigh-in can happen at any point during the day, optimally first thing in the morning. If Brian doesn't do these two items, then the following consequence will be enforced. So before we move on to the consequence, I just want to point a few things out. Number one, these are very specific. He puts exactly what he's going to do. It must be completed, not just I'm going to do a food log, but the food log must be completed by 6 a.m. of the day after. And so having these specific circumstances is something that's very important. And then the consequences. If he doesn't do these things, he'll have to dress up each workday and each Sunday morning for the rest of the quarter. Remember, this guy's an entrepreneur who can wear whatever he wants. So he's saying his consequences, he has to dress up. I sympathize with this. I don't want to have to dress up. And then he takes it into the specific definition. Dress up is defined as not wearing jeans, t-shirts, hoodies, or shorts. And then down here, Brian will be held accountable by the following means. And I would say this piece for me personally, I think could be optional. It's kind of like depends on what your objectives are. But it says he'll text Stacy, I assume that's his wife, a picture of his weight each day and ask Joey, the trainer, to monitor his eating logs. And then he will also give Joey $200 to use as he sees fit if he misses one day of logging food. And so you see here we have very specific objectives that he's trying to accomplish, very specific consequences, and then he's got his accountability partners. And down here, he's got his own signature, then he's got his wife's signature, and then the accountability partner signature. And for me, this is what I was talking about, where this part, I think in the book he even says that the guy Brian had tried it without the signature part just because it felt a little bit like overkill, and it just he didn't stick to it. And I think that this is kind of what happened to me. Like I had set consequences for myself, but even if I just casually mentioned them to somebody else, like I felt comfortable just shifting the consequences for one reason or another. But when I have said I'm going to do these things, here's what's going to happen if I don't do these things, and here are the people that I'm going to share that with, then I stick to it because I want to be known as somebody who sticks to what he says. And so I do see there could be, if you are somebody who legitimately does not care even about being somebody, a person of their word, then I could see this not working. But outside of that, I don't really know how it wouldn't, and I'm not saying that it's a perfect solution that you'll never do the things and experience the consequences, but I am saying it's a pretty foolproof system. And so coming down here, this is just more of the same. He had goals for each quarter of the year. So here's the sample that you could print out and use for yourself. What is your main objective? If you don't follow through, what is the consequence? Who will you report to? And then the signatures. It's really a pretty simple thing here. So close this out. Oops, I totally closed the whole slideshow. Oh well. But that's basically the slides. I had one other that was just like a sample, but I'll just talk through that. For me, I think that it literally I think that that's pretty simple, but it literally you could even take it a step further with simplicity and just like mine is just a document, literally a Google document that said, because I'm not a big fan of printing stuff and having physical papers laying around. And so I just made a Google document and I just wrote out like I think it started with like 3 bullet points. If I do this, then this will happen. Um, and so I then sent that document to the people, and I actually chose to do like 3 or 4 people, um, just because I thought the more people I'm accountable to, the better. And so that is really all there is to this tool. It's literally um, something that's meant to build in a way to change your habits. And I have used this to break bad habits. I'd imagine you could probably also use it to kind of like, start good habits. Uh, I will go to the gym 3 times a week. If I don't hear my consequences, these are the people. And so it's a really good habit transformation tool. And if you read the book, a lot of what it goes into is just this like risk versus reward and this punishment, or like this action and consequence that's in there. And when you think about it, that's a lot of the root of like behavior change in us. Like I think about that John Piper quote that stuck with me for years before I knew how to apply it. It's like those are some pretty extreme consequences that he was mentioning there. But like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter how tempted I am to do something. If that type of scenario that he was talking about, you know, was to happen, no, I wouldn't do those things. You know what I mean? Even if it feels irresistible. And so this for me has been a really, really helpful tool. With these calls, I know that this is literally the first one I've done. I imagine we'll probably have like a few more people as this thing grows. Uh, my goal with these calls is just to share what I'm going to say, put it out there, and then just open it up to like answer questions or help anybody apply it specifically. And when that's done, just end it. Like, we don't need to sit here for a whole hour just because we have an hour allotted to it. So, um, babe, you got anything you want to say or ask or thoughts on it? No, go down to the right of the microphone and change it to this where it says same as system, and that should work. No, don't be sorry. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't have anything else to say. I mean, really, it's just like I think it's just if there's anything additional I can stress with it, is literally just making, like I said it once, but just making it specific. Because even when I did this, um, like there were certain things that I was not like one of mine that I wasn't specific about. Like one of mine was um I don't want to mess with my phone while I'm driving because that was a bad habit I had gotten into. Um Not, scrolling or anything like that, but just, quickly swiping stuff around and stuff like that. Or and I wanted to break that habit. And so my consequence for that was like if I mess with my phone while driving, I just at first said if I mess with my phone while driving, I'll give up my next serving of caffeine, which is a huge deal for me. And so when but then I realized that wasn't clear enough. There are certain things with my phone that I actually have to do while driving, so I clarified it a bit to like like I'm talking about, the GPS and stuff like that. Like if I talk on Marco Polo while I drive. It's on a dash mount. I'm not touching it, but I can just touch the button up there and talk, touch the button and turn it off. So I had to make it more specific. So it's not like, okay, literally anything that I do with my phone. And so anyway, you make it, and then over time you refine it, and you're like, okay, this was a little bit not specific enough. Let me make it better. Did you get your mic fixed?
I don't know.
Yep, there you are. All right,
It's echoing.
hang on. We're just a few rooms away, so let me move to a different spot so you can talk. Hang on. All right, go ahead. I'm outside.
Um, I hear what you're saying, but one of the things you said, like right there at the very end, was that unless you're somebody who like doesn't care what people think about you or doesn't care about being like a dependable person or whatever, then this should work for you. And like I don't want to burst your bubble, but I care a lot about what people think about me. I definitely want to be somebody that people can depend on, but I have some pretty severe mental health issues. And as many times as I've tried accountability of different forms, and you and I have talked about this habit contract and stuff like that, it's not a matter of me not caring what people think about me. Or, it's not that I don't want to be a dependable person or don't care. It's just simply that at some point, like, I just unfortunately feel like I've failed so many times in so many things that I'm just like, okay, well, I failed at this again. So I'll just try another way tomorrow, or I'll try it again tomorrow. I'm very honest about that. Um, so it's less about like not caring what people think about me and more about just like people have come, I think, unfortunately, to know that my best isn't always very good.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up and that you're on here because I think so. Okay, what I said was I didn't just like when I said this will. I don't know if I said exactly this will work for you, but what I meant is like if you set these consequences and then you do these actions and then you have to experience those consequences, that will work, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying you won't ever do the action. But what I am saying is if you're like, okay, if I do this, then this will happen. And then you find yourself just consistently still doing that thing, even though that consequence is going to happen. And then you experience that consequence over and over and over. Then I would say the consequence isn't high enough. Like the stakes aren't high enough. So you have to like say something more aggressive. You know what I mean? And again, um, I think the only way out of that is if you choose really poor accountability partners who are never going to ask you about it, or you choose to lie to them. You know what I mean? And I don't think you do either one of those two things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I definitely want this to be something that I can try to implement for different things. But yeah, I think that would be what it came down to is making sure that I am, you know, having the consequences instead of just being like, oh well, I'll try again. That was a big one for me.
Yeah. You have any other thoughts on it, questions, anything I can you want to talk about?
No.
Cool. Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because I tend to like you know how my brain works. Like it's like okay, systems, and this system is freaking flawless, and you can't mess it up. But it always is helpful to for somebody to me to bring something up that's like their brain doesn't work the same way as mine. But I
I
do
can
think,
always mess it up.
huh?
I can always mess it up.
No, it's not, I don't think it messed it up because I just think like can you throw out an example of a concept of like a habit that you'd want to either like break or start?
Lots.
Just throw one out that you're comfortable throwing on putting on here.
Like a really, really, really simple one would just be making sure to take my like supplements every day.
Okay. And then what do you feel like would be a consequence if you didn't do that that might actually like make you do it?
I have no idea. Haven't even thought about this yet.
What if it was like okay, like what if it I don't again I don't think it has to be related. You know what I mean? Because for me like the driving and the coffee thing that's not related. It's just like a consequence that's this will happen and this is gonna like be something that I really don't enjoy. Like, I'm gonna
Okay.
struggle in the day if I don't have this caffeine. At this because I'm very strategic with my caffeine. I'd have it at the same time every single day for a certain purpose. And so, like, I don't know. For you, it could be something like you can't like kick back and relax at night. You got to just like work until you go to bed, or you got, you gotta, like, I like what that guy said. Like, I can't dress comfortably. I have to wear something that's like stiff and uncomfortable. you know, it could be anything, but like, let's just say that you said, if I don't take my supplements, then I have to dress uncomfortably, just throwing it out there. But then you just kept not taking the supplements. I think that, like, there's two things there. Number one is, like, why are you not taking the supplements? Is it because you just can't make yourself for whatever reason? And if that's the situation, then I think the consequence isn't high enough and you bump it up. But if the situation is, no, I'm not taking my supplements because I just keep forgetting, then that removes the consequence situation. Like, and I think you should just, have create a system that reminds you of that, whether it's alarms or whether it's somebody that literally reminds you to do it. But I'm also the opinion that if the consequence is high enough and you want to avoid it badly enough, then you will find a way to remember. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think what I was going to comment on is exactly what you just said. Like, one or both of these things has to fall into place in order for this to work. You either have to desire the goal enough, and or you have to fear the consequences enough. Like, whichever way your brain works better. My problem, and this is not an excuse, it's something I'm trying to fix and grow in myself. My problem is I rarely care enough or fear enough, because while I'm an incredibly optimistic person and that can be wonderful, it also means that I always believe I'll find a better, different, maybe not easier, but better way, and yeah, I mean, it's very hard for me, again, not making excuses. It's something I'm trying to fix and grow in myself. It's very hard for me to care enough about something without or fear consequences enough that I technically don't have to do. I'm afraid of shame. I'm afraid of guilt. I'm more likely to do things if one of those is a factor, but I don't believe that that's a healthy way for me to grow. Um, so that's where I'm struggling.
So are you saying, I just want to make sure I understand that part. Are you saying that if, let's say, you set an action, you set a consequence, you told people that who would be a good accountability partners about it. Um, are you saying that it might be a situation where you might do the thing and then not enforce the consequence on yourself and then just confess that to the person? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
That's what I'm saying. You either have to you have to believe, it really comes down to desiring the goal enough to even administer the consequences to yourself. So it's not just like, oh, I would lie and just say I did it. No, I mean, unfortunately, I am the one who would be like, I didn't take my supplements, but I'm sure as heck not fixing to dress uncomfortable tomorrow. My period starts tomorrow. Like, I need to be comfortable and just not do it. And that's
Hmm.
like, that right there is my number one hurdle. It's the thing I am trying to break down in myself.
Yeah. I mean,
So yeah, I didn't mean to stump you. I just
no, I mean, I think it's good because if I throw out a system that I think will work for everybody, and somebody literally there is like, this won't work for me and here's why, that's good because it helps me to think through, like, okay, well, like, how could this system work for everybody? But I do, okay, so, like, for me, from like I said earlier, the for me the hang up was, there wasn't a consequence that was bad enough that I cared enough about. And I guess the only way that this could work in that scenario is if you give yourself a consequence that's going to be bad enough but that you will do. And I don't and so maybe you give somebody else the authority to to enforce that consequence on you in some way. So let's say that, like, I mean, I'm your husband, we live together, obviously. So let's say that you said, uh like for instance, like you get in seasons where you like to drink things that aren't water, right? Like and so like let's just say that you were like, if I don't take my supplements, um, every day this week, then all of next week I can't have anything to drink except for water. And then you tell me, and you like you say this ahead of time before it's happened. You say, and you have to make sure there's no other drinks available to me. And so you bring in another person into the equation who actually has to enforce the consequence upon you. And I do think that that will limit it more, because there's only so many things that can happen, that that you can give somebody that kind of power on. But like, um, because like the clothes thing, the dressing uncomfortably, that's not something that I could necessarily enforce. I could say, hey, you said you were going to do this, but if you say I don't care, like there's not much I can do about that unless I'm going to wrestle you down. So it's like, but I sure can just throw away all the drinks that aren't water, before your very eyes. What do you think about that?
Um, I mean, honestly, it feels a little humiliating because it feels like the type of the way that we have to enforce consequences on our children. But I think part of growth as like, we had the kids in Judah tonight, and what I kept telling them is, on the way there, as I said, being strong and being brave is not about being good at something or um, kind of trying it. It's about like giving it your all the very first time, even if you might not be good at it. Um, so yeah, I mean, it feels a little humiliating to be almost 34 years old and like, "Oh, okay, well, I have to have someone else enforce my consequences for me because I'm not strong enough to do it on my own." But I'm trying to like adjust my mindset so that rather than that, I'm like, okay, let's keep working till we find something that can be useful and then utilize that. Um,
I don't think there should
so
be. I don't think it should be anything to be ashamed of, though, because I mean, we all have things that we struggle with way more heavily than others, and
yeah,
we all like, if we were strong enough, to not need any help, I mean, we wouldn't need God either. We wouldn't need each other. You know what I mean? And I think this is the biblical picture of it is to, have a community of people around you, to help you take care of these things. And when I think back to that Matthew 18 passage, like one thing that just came to mind for me is, I mean, the consequences, and again, we're like there's all kind of things, but the things Jesus says there are literally pretty insane. It's like, hey, if your eye causes you to sin, uh take it out, pluck it out. It's better to live, with only one eye, uh than uh than to go to hell, is what he says. And so it's like, man, like, first of all, that means you should be willing to go whatever stakes. We're talking about sin here, right? Because I do want to make that distinction. Like, there's a difference between trying to break a sinful habit. Biblically, there's a difference between trying to break a sinful habit and something that is not sinful but is just a bad habit that you'd like to get out of your life. So I do think that they should maybe be handled with different degrees of severity. But I think that, like, for instance, like if somebody was ever going to actually enforce, hey, chop off my arm because I keep stealing or something and can't seem to control myself, I'd imagine they'd have to bring somebody else in to help them chop off their arm. They're probably not going to do it themselves. You know what I mean? And so that's just my thoughts. I mean, I don't think that you should have any shame in it or feel silly about it. Um, it's just part of life in, a sinful world where we struggle against ourselves. Yeah, anything else before we wrap it up?
no, that was it. I'm excited to put a little work into thinking about where I want to start. Another issue I've had is wanting to do everything all at once, all or nothing. Um, so I think I just want to kind of evaluate the ever growing list of things that I want to be better at or be more consistent in or whatever. And, maybe pick one or two at first and work through what I think would be good consequences and who I think would be beneficial accountability partners and so on. So yeah, I'm excited. I think this is good info, babe.
Yeah, cool. Wish I could say I came up with it. All right. I love you. See you in 2 seconds. Anybody who sees this recording later, like I said, if you have thoughts like Megan did, you have any questions, you have any ways why this wouldn't work for you that we could maybe talk through and help figure it out. Because again, I want to clarify things I come on here with that have worked foolproof for me or have worked foolproof for other people. Um, doesn't necessarily guarantee it will be perfect for everybody. My goal with this is share tools that I think will help most people. But there are always exceptions. I'm the exception to a lot of things in life. Sometimes fortunately, sometimes unfortunately. And so I totally get that. So I'm here to help in any way that I can. I wouldn't say I'm an expert. It's not something I'm going to school for or anything like that. I just naturally tend to. One of my strengths is like being able to create systems to work on things and refine. And then when I find systems to refine them and make them more specific to my life, if it's something somebody else came up with. So I'm more than happy to help anybody to whatever degree I can. So thank you.